The following clip is from the North to South Show, live every Monday and Wednesday at 7 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, where we talk SEC football everything. Now, we'd love to have you out for next show, but for now, hit that like button down below, hit that subscribe button, and enjoy this clip. Get into our over and under segment in the SEC. Now, I just went on the live DraftKings bookie over under SEC odds, whatever you want to call it. Now, I'm not saying that I'm endorsing gambling or anything. I don't think if you don't feel comfortable with it, don't spend your money or anything like that. Like, this is something that I just think is fun and it creates really good conversation around SEC teams and how we expect them to do this season, because the over under, basically, if you don't know, the over under is trying to pick the middle number in between a team's expected win total this season. So, for example, they'll say, like, let's pick Missouri. So DraftKings will come out and give an option for you to be able to bet over under Missouri 6.5 wins. Now, over means you think Missouri is going to have over 6.5 wins this season, so obviously that will be 7-12. These are going to be regular season, and under means that they'll have anywhere from 0 to 6 wins, and then you'll get a certain odd on each one. So that's what over under is if you don't know about it, and that's what I'm basically going to be going through and telling you guys today. Is I have all the odds for all the SEC teams, all the over under totals, and I'm going to be telling you, should you hit the over button, or do I think you should hit the under button? So first off, we're going to go division by division, and we're going to go alphabetically in division. So we'll start off with the SEC East, starting off with Florida. Now, Florida is at an over-under of 9 this season. I personally think that's a bit high, and you just look at some of the games. When you have Alabama on the schedule, when you have Georgia on the schedule, when you have to travel to LSU, those are 3 losable games, really, really losable games in my mind, and then having to go throughout the rest of the schedule against teams like, I think Kentucky will be a decent component for Florida this year. I think Missouri will be a decent opponent for Florida this year. You're expected to go through all those games without a single slip-up. It's really tough for me to call, so I am going with 9 wins. If this was 8.5, I might say you could go the over with Florida, but that 9-win mark, which means you have to have 10 to 12 wins for Florida for this to hit, I'm going the under for Florida, so under 9 wins for Florida. Next up, we have Georgia. Georgia at 10.5, over under 10.5, which is relatively high for the Georgia Bulldogs, but we know the expectation for them this year, and it is playoff or bust for Georgia Bulldog fans. They want to make the playoffs this season. The Clemson game means a lot because, again, I've said it, I think Georgia's going to win the game. Until something happens that changes my mind, and up until this point, because this is going to be the first game of the season, it'll have to be an injury or something like that. I still feel really strongly that Georgia's going to come out of that game with the win. And even if they don't, you have your one slip up against Clemson, yeah, you'll lose that game. I just look at the rest of the games on the schedule for Georgia. Your biggest matchup is going to be against Florida, and then maybe like your Missouri, Kentucky, and maybe traveling to Auburn. I think those are all going to be winnable games, pretty winnable games for Georgia. So even if they slip up against Clemson, you still have a really good chance at getting 11 wins. And again, I said it, I think they're going to beat Clemson. Let's say they beat Clemson. You get one slip up for Georgia, and I think that they can easily go through the last 11 of the games 10-1. So I am smashing the over for the Georgia Bulldogs at 10.5. Next up, we have Kentucky. Now, Kentucky's over-under is at 7. Earlier in the day, it was at like 6.5, but it changed, so I kind of had to adjust. I still feel really, really strongly about hitting the over for Kentucky. I think Kentucky's an underrated team, especially if this was at 6.5. I think this would be one of the best bets of all the SEC over-unders for you to take Kentucky over 6.5, but I'm still going to take the over at 7. Look, their tough games are going to be obviously Georgia, obviously Florida, and LSU coming there. Those are going to be 3 tough games. So you play a 12-game schedule. That's going to put you, let's say you lose all those games, that's going to put you at 9 wins. You have one more loss to take, and that will probably be against the only other teams that I see that are losable games on here for Kentucky is really only like your Missouri. Let's say you lose to Missouri, you lose to Florida, you lose to LSU, and you lose to Georgia. That puts you at 8 wins still. You still beat, in my opinion, you're still going to beat Mississippi State. You're still going to beat your like Tennessees, your Vanderbilts, your New Mexico States, your Louisvilles. I know I'm a South Carolina fan, but I still think Kentucky, South Carolina will be a good game. And that's just putting into perspective that Kentucky loses all 4 of those games to Georgia, LSU, Florida, and Missouri. I think that they have a really good shot against Missouri. I think that they have a decent shot against Florida. I think even LSU is a decent shot. Now, I think going to Georgia is a bit of a long shot, but if Kentucky can go 1-2 in those games against Florida, LSU, and Georgia, which I think they have a good chance, or if they go 2-4 against Missouri, Florida, or 2-2 against Missouri, Florida, LSU, and Georgia, I think they hit the over easily. So I'm going to smash the over for Kentucky, over 7 wins. Next up, we have the Missouri Tigers. Now, Missouri's kind of in the same boat as Kentucky. They're right at that 7 mark too, over under 7. And for them, I'm going to smash the over 2. I think this team has a really good chance of starting the season out 4-0. So they go Central Michigan's their first game. Then they go to Kentucky, which again, talking about the last one, that's kind of a 50-50 toss-up game. First SEC game, I think, of the whole SEC season. I don't think there's an SEC game before that. So that's going to be the first SEC game of the season for both of those teams and anyone in the SEC. Then you get Southeast Missouri, and then you go to Boston College. I think that those are 4 winnable games for Missouri, a good chance to start out 4-0. And then after that, up until Texas A&M, you get Tennessee and North Texas after that. So I think Missouri's in a really good spot to maybe start the season out 6-0. At least, even if they drop the game to Kentucky, I think you're looking at a good spot. They will be probably around 5-1 in my opinion. Texas A&M, I think, is going to be a loss. Georgia's, I think, is going to be a loss. Florida's a toss-up game. I still think probably that they're going to be underdogs in that game, but that doesn't mean that I don't think Missouri can win this game. But for the concept of this video, let's chalk it down. Florida's a loss, Georgia's a loss, and Texas A&M is a loss. And even throwing Kentucky as a loss, that is 4 losses. That puts you at 8-4. And you look at the rest of the teams they play. At Arkansas might be a challenging game, but I still think Missouri has a really, really good shot to come out of that one. You look at Vanderbilt, you look at your Boston College, even though you're traveling to Boston College, I see that as a win. And then you got your South Carolinas, your Tennessees. I'm smashing the over for Missouri as well. I think that this team is good enough to win over 7 games this season. Now, this one's kind of a joke to me, honestly, because I think over 4.5 wins or under 4.5 wins, I think that is way more reasonable for South Carolina than at 3.5. Of course, I'm taking the over, and this isn't just because I'm a South Carolina fan. I'm taking the over 3.5, 100% for South Carolina this season. Eastern Illinois, at East Carolina, Troy, and Vanderbilt, in my opinion, are the Gamecocks' 4 wins that are on the table for them. Now, I'm not saying that any of these are easy games by any stretch. They still have to go out and perform, but I think those are 4 games that the Gamecocks will be favored in, and I think that they'll come out with wins in all 4 of those. And that's not even talking about, I think South Carolina has a chance to go to Neyland Stadium this season and come out with a win against Tennessee. I think they have a chance against Kentucky this season. Going to Missouri, I think it's going to be a bit of a tougher game for South Carolina. I'm not saying that it's completely unreasonable that South Carolina wins that game, but I think traveling to Missouri will be tough. Probably you're going to have a loss against your Clemson, your Florida, your Texas A&M, and your Georgia. Auburn might even be a winnable game for South Carolina. I'm not saying, again, that they'll be favored in that, but I don't see them a reason why they can't beat Auburn. So the fact that the Gamecocks right now are at 3.5 wins over under, I smash the over easily. I'm even taking it over 4.5. 5.5 is the point where I get really, really questionable. Are the Gamecocks ready to win 6 games this season? But I think 3.5 is an absolute joke to me. Smash the Gamecocks over 3.5, 110%. Now we have the Tennessee Volunteers. Now, Tennessee is the team that we're going to talk about later in the show, but they are at over under 6 wins. 6 wins this season for Tennessee. Now, Tennessee's always has a tough slate because not only do you have your classic Georgias, your Floridas in the East, I think even Missouri and Kentucky, I'll say it multiple times, that I think they're decent opponents this year. But out of the West, you always have Alabama like you do. You travel there this season, and then you have Ole Miss coming to town, who Ole Miss is going to be a really, really good ball team this year. So you start off the season, I think Tennessee has a good chance to start off the season 3-0. I think you'll beat Bowling Green. I think Pitt is going to be a very interesting game, kind of a toss-up game there, but I think it's definitely a game that Tennessee can win. I'm not saying that Pitt has no chance in it, but it's a game that both those teams could easily win. It's not one of those games that one team is going to be some huge favorite. And then you have Tennessee Tech after that, and after that is where it starts to get tough. You go to Florida, you go to Missouri, you get South Carolina at home, and then you have your 2 SEC West teams, Ole Miss, and then at Alabama. Then you go to Kentucky, Georgia at home, and South Alabama and Vanderbilt as wins. So I say, even if you chalk it up, I'm trying to pick out, if you pick out games that I'd say are reasonable for Tennessee to win, I go Bowling Green, Pitt, Tennessee Tech, South Carolina, South Alabama, and then Vanderbilt, and that only puts you at 6 wins. So, and I think that they slip up in one of those games probably to either Pitt or South Carolina. So I'm putting Tennessee at the under 6 wins this season. Finishing up in the SEC East, I have Vanderbilt. Now, Vanderbilt this season, obviously they didn't even win a single game last year. How does the schedule favor out for Vanderbilt this season? The SEC slate, I don't know if Vanderbilt's going to come out with the win. I'm just going to be honest there. The out-of-conference opponents, you get East Tennessee to start off this season. I'm hoping that they'll be able to win that game. You travel to Colorado State, which I don't even know if that's probably a toss-up game. Stanford at home, I think Stanford wins that. Then you got Georgia, and then your only other out-of-conference game is UConn. Does this Vanderbilt team win 4 games? I can't say that confidently, so I am going the under 3 wins for Vanderbilt this season. Moving on to the SEC West now, obviously we're going to go in alphabetical order, and that brings us to the big dogs where we have Alabama at over or under 11.5, and you all know what that means when you hear 11.5. It is this Alabama team going to go undefeated this season? This is really tough for me because you're talking about this Alabama team that, yes, had a lot of turnover. They have a lot of new guys coming in, but that's not to say that this team isn't talented. Let's not forget they're Alabama. To say that they're going to go throughout this whole season and not slip up once when they still have to play opponents like Texas A&M traveling to Texas A&M, they still got to play LSU, who's a really talented team. You still got to play in your rivalry game at Auburn this year. You play Florida first game of the season. You play Miami first game of the season. You have to travel to Florida. You still have to play Ole Miss. Got tons of talent in this Alabama schedule. Saying that they're going to go through it flawless is saying a lot about this team, and I honestly think that this Alabama team is good enough to go undefeated this season, so I am taking the over 11.5. Bold take there, over 11.5 for Alabama this season. This team goes 12-0 undefeated in the regular season. Next up, we have Arkansas at an over-under of 6 win total. This was the toughest one for me, I'm not going to lie, because I really want to root for this Arkansas team. I think that this is a really likable and lovable team in Arkansas. I really want to see them do good this year. But a 7-win team to smash the over for Arkansas right now is really, really, really tough for me to call, especially when you have one of the toughest schedules in all of college football, because not only do you have to go to Georgia this season for your rotating SEC East opponent, you still got to go to Ole Miss, you got to go to Alabama, you got to go to LSU, you still got to play like Auburn and all those guys, Texas A&M. You have Texas coming into Arkansas. Now, that's not a easy loss for Arkansas. It's not like Arkansas has no chance against Texas, but to pick out wins here, you got to win against Rice, you got to win against Georgia Southern, you got to win against Mississippi State, in my opinion. You got a good chance against Missouri, and then probably your next win is probably looking at Auburn, and then picking a 7th win is really, really, really tough to call for me to smash the over for Arkansas, so I'm going to have to go the under for Arkansas here. I apologize, Razorback fans. I would love to see them win over 7 games. I'd love to see them go undefeated this season, honestly, but just right now, if I had to put money on this, which is what we're talking about because we're doing this in a gambling perspective, I don't know if I'd smash the over for Arkansas. Coming up at number 7, coming up next with a 7 over-under win total, we have the Auburn Tigers. Now, Auburn, obviously coming in with the new coach, with Brian Harsin, lots of interesting stuff this season. They also do have one of the tougher schedules in all of college football this year, because not only do you have to travel to LSU, you have to travel to Texas A&M, you have to travel to South Carolina, you have to travel to Arkansas as well, but you also have to travel to Penn State, which is going to be a huge out-of-conference game, and obviously it's probably going to be a whiteout, not an environment you'd want to play in if you are an opposing, or if you are an away team 110%. So picking out wins for Auburn in Brian Harsin's first season, 2 first games I think are wins. You got Akron, you got Alabama State, Georgia State. Probably mark up Mississippi State as a win. That puts you at 4. Then you look at your next probable wins. I look at like South Carolina. I look at Arkansas as probably your 6th. And then even going a 7th is really, really tough to pick out a 7th win here. You're probably looking at Ole Miss or at Penn State, even though at Penn State is going to be really, really tough. It's just way too hard for me to pick out 8 wins here for Auburn. So I am smashing the under for Auburn here, under 7 wins for them. Next up, we have LSU at 8.5, which is pretty high. and a really, really gutsy call to pick the over for this team that has had culture issues the last year. The locker room isn't the greatest and all stuff like that, but the one thing that LSU has, and I think the thing that they will have to continue, or they will continue to have throughout the next coming seasons, is talent. And I think talent floods this LSU locker room. So this season, I pick out the wins for LSU. Going to UCLA, I'm not going to call that a win yet. We're just going to pick out the easy wins. I have McNeese State. I have Central Michigan. I have Mississippi State. I have Arkansas, I think, will be a win for LSU. You have Louisiana Monroe. That's 5 pretty much easy wins for LSU. I think they beat UCLA, so give me a 6 there. I think that they beat Auburn. That's a 7 there. I think that they go to Kentucky and beat them. That's your 8 mark. And now you just got to pick out one more win against Florida, Ole Miss, Alabama, or Texas A&M. And I think they could easily go 1-3 in any one of those games. So I am taking the over for LSU this season. It's gutsy. This is probably the gutsiest call of this whole segment, but I think LSU is really, really talented. And if they just get that locker room culture right this season, if they're coached up well, LSU is going to be a very, very dangerous team. So I'm going over 8.5 for them. Next up, we have Mississippi State. Now, their over-under win total is 6. I thought that was pretty high, especially for the out-of-conference slate that this team has to play, because got Louisiana Tech at home to start off. I think that will probably be a win. NC State at home. I'm not counting that as a win, as an automatic win yet, so I'm sticking at one easy win. At Memphis, I think that could even be a tough matchup. I'm probably going to give Mississippi State the win there, although I don't want to write that down as an automatic win for Mississippi State. But for the sake of this segment, I'll call it a win. Then after that, I think your wins are Vanderbilt. I think wins are Tennessee State, so that puts you at 4. And then you have to go out and win 3 more games. So that's 3 games out of NC State, LSU, Texas A&M, Alabama, Kentucky, Arkansas, at Auburn, and then Ole Miss. I don't know if I could pick out 3 wins out of those games for Mississippi State this season. So that is why I'm smashing the under 6 wins for Mississippi State this upcoming season. Coming up next, second last team, we have Ole Miss. Ole Miss is at 7.5 over-under win total this season. Very interesting for them because they are one of the most talented teams offensively, definitely in the SEC. Their just defense is the big question mark there. They play a tougher slate because one of their out-of-conference opponents is Liberty, who you look at that logo and you're like, that should be an easy win for Ole Miss, but you look at what that team did last year, and that actually makes you panic a bit. Ole Miss, 7.5. Let me go through the wins. I think they beat Louisville. I think they beat Austin Peay. I think they beat Tulane. I think you got to win against Arkansas. I think you got to win at Tennessee. I think you got a win definitely versus Vanderbilt. I want to say, and then, so that puts you at 5 automatic wins, and I think winnable games for them. I think them against Liberty, even though Liberty is a good team, I have a win there, so that puts you at 7 wins, and that means you need one more win against Mississippi State, Texas A&M, at Auburn, LSU, or at Alabama. I think at Mississippi State is probably your best bet there, but even at Auburn, I think is a good chance, so I am smashing the over for Ole Miss. Over 7.5 wins for Ole Miss this upcoming season. Finishing off with Texas A&M at a over-under win total of 9.5. Texas A&M is at 9.5. One of the most talented teams in all the SEC. Really, if Haynes King is going to be the question mark. He is either the answer or the problem for Texas A&M this season, depending on how they do. Because if Haynes King is the answer, I think Texas A&M will do very, very well this season. If he is the problem in the fact that Texas A&M can't get the pass off, maybe their offensive line isn't glued well and they're just getting run over the whole game, and Haynes King is just getting sacked a bunch of times. I think Texas A&M is still a really talented team. So over under 9.5 wins. Wins on the table for Texas A&M, Kent State, even going to Colorado, I'm going to call that a win. New Mexico, Arkansas, Mississippi State. At Missouri's tough. I'll call it a win right now. So that's 6. South Carolina, 7. Prairie View puts you at 8, and then you need 2 more wins against going to LSU, going to Ole Miss, Auburn, or Alabama, and I think that they get that. I think at Ole Miss will probably be a win, and even like Auburn at home should be a win for Texas A&M. So I am smashing the over button here. I think Texas A&M's 2 losses this season are probably going to be, I think they lose to Alabama right now. Currently, I think they lose to Alabama, although it's going to be a very good game, very interesting game. And then LSU's a real toss-up game for me. I don't know where to call that right now. It's the end of the season. Obviously, still tons to be talked about and tons to be looked at for both those teams when they actually hit the field. But I think this Texas A&M team is a double-digit regular season win club, 110%.